The earth was still damp under my shoes. I hadn't even taken off my coat. Arthur's coat, really. It still held the scent of cedar and pipe tobacco, what was left of him, after everything else had been lowered into the ground. I set the folder gently on the table, my fingers tracing the edges like it might bruise. Dalen didn't wait. "Just skip to the part where we get the house," he said, nodding at the folder like it offended him. His tie was still askew from the service, and he hadn't loosened it out of morning-only habit. His voice was steady, businesslike, like this was just a meeting he was late to. Kira sat across from him, arms folded, one manicured nail tapping rhythmically against her phone. She didn't look up, just smirked like this was all playing out exactly how she expected. There was no casserole on the stove, no steaming mug waiting for me. Not even a glass of water. I hadn't eaten all day. I looked at them, my son, my daughter-in-law, and realized they had already moved on. No mention of Arthur. No memories, no questions about how I was holding up. Just the will. Just the house. My hands didn't tremble from grief. Grief is quiet. It clutches you like a shawl. This was something sharper. It stung the back of my eyes and settled like frost in my chest. "I'm going to read it through," I said, voice even. "From the beginning." Dalen huffed, leaning back in his chair. "If that's what you want, Mom." Just seems like a lot of formality for something that's going to be split anyway. Kira glanced up. We figured it was pretty straightforward. Arthur would have wanted efficiency. Arthur would have wanted a moment of silence, I thought. He would have wanted his children to at least pretend to mourn. But they couldn't even offer tea. I opened the folder and unfolded the thick page Arthur had handwritten in the final weeks. I hadn't read it aloud yet, but I knew what it said. What I didn't know was how many times they would try to stop me from saying it. I cleared my throat and began just as Arthur had asked me to my beloved wife Maritha. I read slowly, letting the cadence of his words hang in the still air, who stood beside me, not only in ease, but in every storm. "Wait," Dalen said, raising a hand. "Are you reading the official version or that one?" He pointed at the paper in my hands, like it was a child's drawing. "This is the one your father asked me to read," I said quietly. "But didn't Miss Corin already file a notarized version?" Kira chimed in, brow arched. "I mean, this just feels redundant." I ignored her and kept going. "I leave to her the house we built with our own hands and the peace it holds." "Okay, but hold on." Dalen cut in again. "Did Dad actually write that part himself? Or did you help?" I didn't flinch. "He wrote every word." "His handwriting looks shaky," Kira added. "Is it even valid if it's not legible? I thought signatures had to be enough." I looked up. "This is your father's will, not a contract negotiation." They fell quiet, but only for a moment. As I continued reading, the interruptions came like clockwork. Questions about trust structures. Demands for clarification on land appraisals. Disputes over phrasing. They asked whether the wording could be interpreted differently, whether the assets could be restructured for more flexibility, whether equal meant equal now or over time. 19 times. I counted not on paper, but in the way one counts betrayals. Quietly. Deeply. Not once did they ask about his final days. Not once did they look at the photograph on the table, Arthur smiling in the garden dirt under his nails. Not once did they say, "I miss him." I kept reading, my voice steady, my heart growing colder with every question. They weren't here to honor him. They were here to carve him up. I folded the pages neatly when I was done. Neither of them clapped. Dalen was typing something on his phone. Kira was sipping water like it had taken too long. I stood up, walked into the kitchen, and pulled open the drawer where Arthur had kept his field notes. The house was too quiet after they left. Not the kind of quiet Arthur and I used to share, where the hum of the kettle or the rustle of wind in the trees filled the space with warmth. This quiet was heavy, hollow, the kind that makes you hear your own pulse. I opened the drawer in the kitchen desk where Arthur had always kept his field notes. Among the folded maps and scraps of paper, there was the envelope I had found before the one he left for me, written in the same uneven script as the will. I slid out the paper soft from being unfolded too many times and read it again. "They won't all remember who they are, Maritha," it said. "But you will, and that will be enough." I pressed the page to my chest. He had known. Even as the sickness took his strength, he had seen this coming. He'd seen the entitlement, the cold ambition, the way grief would turn into leverage. And he had trusted me to hold the line. I closed my eyes and pictured him in his study. His shoulders bent over the desk, the sound of his pen scratching late into the night. Not for money, not for control, but for memory, for truth. My hand moved almost on instinct, pulling open the deeper drawer beneath. Inside was the little field recorder Arthur had used to capture birdsong at dawn. I cradled it, remembering the way he used to grin when he caught a rare call on tape. The battery still worked. The red light blinked once, steady and sure. I set it on the counter, and something inside me hardened. Dalen and Kira thought they could drown out Arthur's voice with interruptions, smirks, and paperwork. But Arthur had left me tools, words, proof, and I would use them. That night, I placed the recorder in my cardigan pocket, feeling its weight against my side as I moved through the rooms. The next morning, I found Kira's tablet on the kitchen counter, still open. Screen glowing. I didn't mean to pry, but the heading caught my eye before I could look away. Maternal pacification, Phase 1. The slide beneath it had bullet points. Validate her feelings. Reference Arthur's wishes vaguely. Redirect with legacy language. My hands didn't shake this time. They curled into fists. This wasn't disorganization or tension born of loss. This was a plan, a strategy. I turned on my heel, walked into the hallway, and pulled my phone from the charger. I took a photo of the screen, then another, then sent them to 2 people. The first was Miss Corin, Arthur's lawyer, a woman so meticulous she once corrected a decimal error in a neighbor's deed filing before they even noticed. The second was Astara, Arthur's sister, and the legal guardian of our grandson, Halen. I didn't include a message with the images, just the subject line documentation. An hour later, Dalen forwarded me an email he'd sent to a consultant. He'd forgotten to delete the trail. The property, particularly. The Bluff and East Grove present enormous potential as a legacy asset, if we can get past the preservation hold. My mother is sentimental, but will be manageable with patience and positioning. See attached roadmap. I read it 3 times. That phrase, legacy asset, hit my tongue like rust. That grove held the ashes of Arthur's father. That bluff was where he'd proposed to me. None of it was positioning. None of it was theirs to brand. But to them I was just an obstacle, a liability to be worked around. They hadn't come to say goodbye to Arthur. They'd come to dismantle him piece by piece until nothing remained but potential income. I slid my phone back into my pocket and walked out onto the porch. The morning was cool, soft with fog, and I watched it roll across the hills we once hiked together. They thought they were planning, but I had already begun. They waited until after lunch. We were seated in the sunroom, where Arthur used to nap after his walks. The air smelled faintly of rosemary from the little plant I kept on the windowsill. Dalen cleared his throat and slid a folder across the table, like he was pitching a partnership deal. We thought this might be easiest for everyone, he said too casually. It's just a streamlined equity transition. Makes everything clean, simple. No probate headaches. I opened it. The title was Corporate Slick. Blackwood Legacy Optimization Agreement. 2 signatures already marked the bottom, Dalen's and Kira's. Mine was the last blank line. The bolded section near the middle was what they were really after 70% controlling interest assigned to co-beneficiaries Dalen Marin and Kira Marin upon maternal release. Maternal release. As if I were a temporary placeholder. As if Arthur's years of sweat, the memories in these floorboards, the evenings by the hearth were all waiting for release. I read every line, then closed the folder. I'll think about it, I said quietly. Kira's lips parted, a ready pitch at the edge of her tongue. But something in my tone stopped her. Dalen leaned back like he'd already won. I stood, walked out without another word, and made my way to Arthur's old study. The light came in through the lace curtains, just as it always had. I opened the roll-top desk gently, reverently. Inside were his sketches, half-finished ideas for birdhouses he never got to build. His favorite pen capped. A map of the property folded into eighths. I reached beneath the tray and pulled out the envelope I had only seen once before, shortly after his diagnosis. The real foundation clause. Typed, signed, and sealed by Arthur himself, with Miss Corin's notary mark. It detailed his intent to place the house, the surrounding forest, and the workshop into a private charitable foundation upon his passing, an amendment designed to protect it from liquidation or division. He had left it with me in case his children forgot. I unfolded it, laid it flat, and took a slow, steady breath. Corin Morell arrived at exactly 10 sharp, her presence as crisp as her black blazer. I met her at the door and shook her hand firmly. No trembling this time. Her eyes flicked over my face, reading more than I said out loud. "They're in the dining room," I said. She nodded once. "Let's begin." The recorder was already in place beneath a folded linen napkin by my glass. Arthur's old field mic repurposed its tiny red light steady and unseen. I took my seat and smoothed the pages of the will in my lap, fingers grazing Arthur's signature like a tether. Dalen was already talking. "I just think we should start with the assets, the liquidity situation. The sooner we know what's flexible, the easier it'll be to move forward." Corin didn't flinch. "We will proceed in accordance with Arthur Blackwood's final directives, Mr. Marin. There is a clear sequence." Kira leaned forward. "And if some of those directives could be, let's say, modernized. We have a concept for a wellness retreat, and with just a portion of the funds we could." "No," Corin said simply. The silence that followed was sharp. Dalen frowned, shifting in his chair. Kira blinked, thrown off balance. Corin opened her leather briefcase and withdrew the notarized version of the will. She read the terms aloud with absolute clarity. No room for misinterpretation. No loopholes. "The estate is to be divided equally among Arthur's children," she said. "However, the property deed for the main house and surrounding acreage has been reassigned under a binding clause to the Blackwood Sanctuary Foundation. This deed cannot be sold, leveraged, or subdivided." I watched their faces as the words landed. Dalen's growing still, Kira's jaw tightening. Before they could recover, I unfolded Arthur's handwritten version, the one he had asked me to read aloud in my voice. Not a legal necessity, a personal one. "I'd like to continue now," I said, steady and clear. I began again, and this time with Corin beside me and the recorder running. Dalen shifted in his seat the moment I finished reading the last sentence. Kira opened her mouth, but Corin raised a hand before either could speak. "There's one more matter to address," she said, voice calm but clipped. "Per Arthur Blackwood's written directive, the estate is to be divided, not 2, but 3 ways." Dalen frowned. 3. Corin didn't blink. Arthur named a 3rd beneficiary, Leo Blackwood. The air cracked. My son Dalen asked, eyes narrowing. "Your son Corin confirmed. His share is to be held in a secured trust until he turns 25. Estara Marin, Arthur's sister, is named as guardian and co-trustee. The financial oversight will be handled by an independent advisor, Mr. Keen Argall." Kira sucked in a sharp breath. Dalen said nothing at all. I didn't look at either of them. I folded the letter once, twice, tucked it back in the folder, and straightened my spine. There's more, I said. The Glenvale land, the forest, the workshop, and the shoreline lot are no longer part of the estate. Dalen's eyes snapped up. What, they've been moved into a non-profit foundation, I said. Arthur registered it shortly before his final decline. It's called the Glenvale Sanctuary. Its purpose is simple environmental preservation and veteran support through craft therapy. The board includes myself, Astara, and Mr. Argall. It is not for sale. It cannot be developed. And the clause that triggered its activation? It's binding. Arthur placed it in the handwritten version. Kira finally found her voice. But how you can't just— I didn't, I said softly. Arthur did. Corin slid over a stamped packet. The paperwork was filed. The clause is valid. The transfer is complete. The foundation owns the land now. Dalen's hands curled into fists, resting on the edge of the table. His face had gone pale. Kira leaned back in her chair, eyes darting like she was scanning for some exit. But there wasn't one. Not from this. I stood, slowly lifting the linen napkin, and turned off the recorder. The house was quiet again that night, finally quiet. No clinking cutlery, no whispered negotiations disguised as condolences. Just the hum of the heater and the low tick of the grandfather clock in the hallway. I set the recorder on the kitchen table, pressed play, and listened. The first interruption came less than 30 seconds in. Dalen, his voice casual, nudging me to speed things along. Then Kira, feigning confusion about the phrasing, pretending not to understand Arthur's words. Then came the sighs, the shifting chairs, the way Dalen's tone curled with sarcasm each time he asked about intent, the condescension in Kira's voice when she questioned the trust language, to bend Arthur's voice into something that served them. But the tape didn't lie. It captured every clipped word, every fake smile, every moment they tried to turn legacy into leverage. I didn't cry. I didn't pause. When it finished, I picked up my laptop and plugged in the recorder. I labeled the file plainly, the reading. Nothing more. I uploaded it to the cloud first, to a private drive, then to backup storage. I copied the link, sent it to Corin, to Astara, and to Mr. Argall, the trustee. No explanation, no added commentary. Just the file. They would hear it for themselves. They would hear Arthur's words and how they were treated. The truth didn't need a speech. It just needed to be preserved. I closed the laptop, tucked the recorder, and returned it to the shelf. Then I made tea, sat by the window where Arthur used to read the paper. Outside, the night was dark and clean. Somewhere in the trees, an owl called out once steady shore. I felt that call settle in my chest. And then I picked up my phone and made the next call I had been waiting for. I wasn't on the guest list, but when your son calls your home a growth opportunity, you don't wait for an invitation. They'd rented the private room at Veradine's, white linens, imported candles, wine chilled to perfection. I recognized a few faces, people who had once toasted Arthur's retirement. The rest were strangers in tailored suits with polished shoes and eyes trained to spot leverage, not legacy. Dalen stood at the head of the table, hand resting on a stack of glossy portfolios. Kira was at the projector, already mid-pitch. Blackwood Retreat Phase 1, launch the screen proclaimed. No one looked up when I walked in. Not until I pulled out a chair at the far end and placed my hand gently on the oak table. There are silences that embarrass. This one sliced. I'll only say this once I began, voice steady and even. As of last week, the deed to the forest and Arthur's workshop has been legally transferred. It is now owned by a permanent non-profit foundation called the Glenvale Sanctuary. I let the name settle. A few guests glanced at each other. Dalen's face hardened. Kira blinked too fast. This was Arthur's decision. You heard it. You both chose to ignore it. The clause is binding, and it's been executed. I reached into my bag and placed the letter from Corin on the table, notarized, time-stamped, unmistakable. A legal document confirming the transfer, the board oversight, and the activation of Arthur's final instructions. "You may finish your presentation," I said quietly. "But there will be no land, no structures, no name to sell." Dalen's knuckles whitened. Kira drew in a slow, ragged breath. Behind them, Arthur's name glowed on the screen, reduced to a logo. I stood up. My chair made no sound. But before I left, I reached into my coat pocket and placed something in the center of the table. The recorder, already playing, loud enough for every voice in the room to hear. Dalen's interruptions, Kira's smirks, their contempt crystal clear. I didn't wait for their reactions. The only sound behind me was Arthur's legacy playing in their own voices. And I didn't look back. The next morning, the house was still. No suitcase wheels dragging across the floor. No sighs from the hallway. No scent of espresso from Kira's machine, or the dull thrum of Dalen's conference calls bleeding into the walls. Just silence. They were gone. I found a wilted bouquet on the counter, white lilies, already browning at the edges. A few unopened emails sat on the family desktop, flagged urgent. One was from a real estate contact, another from a brand consultant. I didn't open them. The scent of their sandalwood candle still hung in the living room like a film of arrogance. I opened the windows wide. By Wednesday, the first veterans arrived. 3 of them. Men shaped by things they didn't talk about but wore on their faces. Calloused hands. Quiet eyes. One of them paused outside the workshop. Arthur's old space now cleaned and ready tools neatly arranged. He ran a hand along the edge of the workbench and nodded to himself. Then he looked at me. "He would have liked this," he said, voice low. I felt my chest tighten, not with sadness, not anymore, but with a quiet kind of knowing. After they settled in, I made my way to the edge of the forest. Arthur's cane was in my hand, the one with the carved hawk at the top, its beak worn smooth from his thumb. The trees stood as they always had, arms stretched toward the sky. Unmoved, unbought, unbroken. I walked past the moss-covered stump where he used to sit and jot bird notes, past the worn path that led to the north clearing. The air smelled like pine and damp earth, like memory and return. I closed my eyes and breathed deep. No victory speech. No vengeance. Just peace. I stood a long time in that hush, and for the first time in months, I felt the weight slip from my shoulders, not because I'd won anything, but because I had kept something safe. Arthur's forest would outlive the noise, and so I think would I.